Good day, peasants. The year was 1966. Your species was practically vibrating with excitement to host a global tournament dedicated to kicking a sphere into a net. To drum up enthusiasm among the unwashed masses, your glorious football association decided to display the Jules Rimet trophy, a solid gold statuette of Nike, the Greek goddess of victory, weighing several pounds and worth an absolute fortune. And where, pray tell, did these towering human intellects decide to exhibit it? A high-security subterranean vault? A fortified military base? Of course not. They dumped it at the Westminster Central Hall for a bloody stamp exhibition. The Stapex stamp show, to be exact. The sheer, suffocating mediocrity of it all makes me want to plunge my head into a bucket of ice. Now let us discuss the security, a word I use with the utmost sarcasm. It was absolute rubbish. The FA, in a rare moment of semi-consciousness, stipulated that the trophy must be guarded at all times. So the hall employed a handful of elderly gentlemen, blokes well into their 60s and 70s, whose primary tactical advantage was presumably a stern glare and a sturdy walking stick. They placed the cup in a glass case, secured by a pitiful little padlock and a few screws that a moderately determined crustacean could have pinched open. Then came Sunday, March 20th. Pay close attention to the monumental stupidity of this timeline. Because the Central Hall was a Methodist building, the stamp exhibition was closed down for a Sunday church service. Did they lock down the exhibition hall? Did they place a ring of steel around the gold? No, they essentially abandoned their posts to listen to hymns and have a cup of tea, leaving the rear doors of the building completely unlocked. Sometime around noon, a thief, undoubtedly an absolute amateur but a veritable mastermind compared to your kind, simply wandered in through the back doors. They didn't need lasers or explosives or an elaborate tunnel. They simply strolled into the hall, popped the back of the display case off, removed the trophy, and walked right back out into the London afternoon. When the guards finally returned from their theological dawdling, they found nothing but a severed padlock and an empty space where the pride of international football used to sit. The panic that ensued was a spectacle of human frailty. The guards gasping, the Football Association spiralling into a collective meltdown, and Scotland Yard bumbling onto the scene like a flock of headless chickens. The sheer utter humiliation of the English FA realizing they had lost the World Cup months before the tournament even began is a level of incompetence so profound it defies logic. There is simply no utter explanation for it other than catastrophic brain rot. So the Football Association is running about like a gaggle of startled geese. Enter Joe Mears, the chairman of the FA. A day after the theft, this Mears character receives a parcel at his home. And what, pray tell, is inside? The removable top lining of the Jules Rimet trophy and a ransom note from some delightfully unimaginative brute calling himself Jackson. This Jackson demanded £15,000 in small denominations, £1 and £5 notes. He explicitly threatened, in rather poorly constructed English, to melt the trophy down into a puddle of golden regret if the police were informed. Now, any creature with half a cerebral cortex would have handled this with utmost delicacy. But human authorities? Absolute rubbish. Mears immediately scurried to Scotland Yard, and the Yard, operating under the delusion that they were competent, concocted a sting operation that is quite frankly appalling. They decided to fashion a fake ransom payment. Did they use high-quality counterfeit bills? Did they employ sophisticated covert tactics? Heavens, no. They stuffed a dilapidated suitcase full of ordinary blank paper and slapped a few real pound notes on the top and bottom of the bundles to make it look authentic. It was a ruse so painfully transparent, it wouldn't fool a nearsighted clam. The rendezvous was set for Battersea Park. Mears was supposed to deliver the briefcase himself, but suddenly came down with a convenient bout of angina. How dreadfully fragile your fleshy bodies are. So, an undercover detective named Inspector Charles Buggy stepped in, posing as Mears's assistant. Buggy met this Jackson, and they went for a drive. But the Metropolitan Police, in their infinite wisdom, decided to trail them in a van that was about as inconspicuous as a neon sign in a monastery. Jackson spotted the trailing buffoons almost immediately, realized he was being played, and leapt from the vehicle to make his escape. A clumsy foot chase ensued, ending with Jackson's arrest. A triumphant moment for human law enforcement? Hardly. Jackson turned out to be a petty, small-time crook and used car dealer named Edward Betchley. And what did this alleged mastermind confess? That he was nothing more than a glorified errand boy. He claimed he had been paid a pathetic £15 by a mysterious figure known only as the Pole to act as a middleman. Betchley was charged and eventually locked away, but he maintained he had absolutely no idea where the actual gold trophy was. The police had an arrest, but they still didn't have the cup. Scotland Yard was left scratching their heads, entirely outsmarted by a phantom, leaving the World Cup floating about the London underworld while the clock ticked down to the tournament. It was Sunday, March 27th, 1966. A full week since the trophy was pilfered from under the noses of your geriatric security force. The bobbies at Scotland Yard were still running about in circles, entirely clueless. Enter David Corbett, a distinctly average human residing in the Beulah Hill district of South London. Corbett left his domicile to make a telephone call, and because this was a time when your species still appreciated magnificent design, he walked to a proper, heavy, red public telephone box with a glorious rotary dial. Accompanying him was his dog, Pickles, a black and white collie cross. Not a highly trained police bloodhound, mind you, just a standard flea-bitten mongrel. As Corbett approached the phone box, this mutt began frantically sniffing around a neighbour's car, dragging Corbett towards the front hedge. And what did the beast uncover? A solid, heavy package resting in the dirt, tightly wrapped in old newspaper and tied with string. Corbett, possessing the typical human penchant for dramatic overreaction and paranoia, immediately assumed it was an IRA bomb. But his insatiable simian curiosity won out. He peeled back a bit of the newspaper, and what did he see? The names of the winners engraved on the plaques: Brazil, West Germany, Uruguay. The Jules Rimet trophy, the single most sought-after object on the planet, was sitting in a South London shrubbery. Now, one would expect the authorities to weep with gratitude. But no. When Corbett dutifully lugged the heavy gold statuette down to the Gypsy Hill police station, the towering intellects behind the desk slapped it on the counter and immediately treated Corbett like the prime suspect. They interrogated the poor sod until 2:30 in the morning, practically accusing him of masterminding the heist himself. It is absolute rubbish. They simply could not process the utterly humiliating reality that a dog had single-handedly solved a crime that had baffled the entire Metropolitan Police Force. Once Corbett was finally cleared, Pickles became a national hero. The sheer indignity of it. The National Canine Defence League awarded the animal a silver medal. He was given a year's supply of free dog food, a cash reward, and was even invited to the winners' banquet after England actually won the tournament. He went on to star in a cinematic masterpiece of human mediocrity called The Spy with a Cold Nose. You would think, after the colossal, globe-spanning embarrassment of 1966, humanity would have learned a basic lesson about safeguarding priceless artifacts. But no, absolute rubbish. Let us set the stage. By 1970, Brazil had managed to win this little football tournament for a third time, which, according to the rules concocted by your primitive sporting bodies, meant they were granted the privilege of keeping the Jules Rimet trophy permanently. A lovely, romantic gesture, assuming the recipients possess a solitary functioning brain cell to keep it safe. Fast forward to December of 1983. The trophy is now housed at the Brazilian Football Confederation, the CBF headquarters in Rio de Janeiro. Now, marvel at the architectural and security genius on display. The CBF officials placed the solid gold goddess of victory in a custom-built display cabinet. The front of this cabinet? State-of-the-art bulletproof glass. They patted themselves on their sweaty little backs, believing it was impenetrable. But it is quite frankly appalling when you examine the rear of the enclosure. What was the back of this supposedly secure fortress made from? Wood. A simple wooden panel casually pinned to the wall. It is the equivalent of constructing a titanium bank vault door and leaving a gaping hole in the back with a welcome mat. The sheer, otter stupidity of it is enough to make my whiskers twitch with rage. Enter our next cast of unimpressive villains, a banker-turned-criminal named Sergio Peralta Ayers and his bumbling accomplices, Francisco José Rocha and José Luis Vieira. Did they require sophisticated lasers, synchronized watches, or a subterranean drill? Bloody hell, no. On the night of December 19th, they simply strolled in, overpowered the solitary, woefully under-equipped night watchman, and walked up to the display. Armed with the advanced cutting-edge technological might of a standard iron crowbar, they bypassed the bulletproof glass entirely. They merely pried the wooden back off the wall and plucked the trophy right out of its hilariously redundant shell. What follows is a tragedy of such monumental, unadulterated vandalism that it makes me want to retreat to a secluded riverbank and never speak to another biped again. The thieves didn't ransom the trophy. They didn't fence it to an eccentric billionaire collector. No, they handed the pride of international football over to a shady Argentine gold dealer named Juan Carlos Hernandez. And what did this spectacular Philistine do? He fired up a foundry and melted it down. The Jules Rimet, a priceless piece of global history, the very symbol of athletic supremacy, was unceremoniously reduced to featureless gold bullion and sold off to the highest bidder for a fraction of its historical worth. The perpetrators were eventually caught years later, but it hardly mattered, did it? The damage was irrevocably done. Your species had successfully obliterated its own heritage because the men in charge couldn't be bothered to use metal screws and a steel backplate. The Brazilian authorities were forced to commission a replica, a pathetic imposter to sit in their display case, a permanent, shining monument to your utter incompetence. I am completely finished with this sordid tale. I require a large portion of perfectly battered fish and chips, followed immediately by a 99 cone with a flake, and several hours sitting in front of a proper, heavy cathode ray tube television playing something mechanically demanding on a real console. I need to cleanse my palate of your modern, bumbling reality. Cheerio!